Welcome to episode 10 of the Biblical X-Files, where we attempt to connect myths, legends, and conspiracies to a biblical worldview. Tonight, Logan and I are coming to you live from the gateway to the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Yes, sir.
On the cusp.
On the cusp.
There you go. Remember, we want this to be a viewer-driven show. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your input. We value that. And we also want to always feel free to give us suggestions for shows. Please give us the questions that you want to ask, especially if it's something from a show that wasn't quite clarified. Feel free to shoot that in, and we will make sure we get that out on the next episode to answer that question. Episode 9, our last episode, was really a predicate episode, is what we would call it. It's just laying the foundation, giving some background on the delusion and the deception that's going to take place in the last of the last days. And Jesus told his disciples in that conversation we went over last week in verse 4, make sure no one deceives you. He said, take heed that no one deceives you. And another way of looking at that particular verse would be, make sure you defend yourself against a spirit of delusion. As we speak right now, there is a spirit of delusion that is building. It is gaining momentum. It is feeding off of people, how they're adjusting to it. And the more people that succumb to this spirit of delusion, the more powerful it gets, and it will become like a juggernaut. It can't be stopped as
a virus.
It's a virus, like, you know, we've heard about those, and it'll be
stay away from that.
it's worldwide, and as we said last week, when we read 2 Timothy, I think it's 15 through 17, it builds to a crescendo right before the rapture. But you can see it happening now, as especially when we break down what delusion looks like. Now, see, Jesus didn't tell his disciples and go into great detail about what this delusion will look like. But the Apostle Paul did in his letter to 2 Timothy, which is what we're going to focus on, and a couple other letters that he wrote. So let's go ahead and just jump right in there and start unpacking each bullet of what delusion looks like. Because what the delusion that we're going to read that Paul writes about is exactly what Jesus is referencing over in Matthew 24, in Matthew chapter 24 to his disciples. You got any questions on that before we go? All right, so let's pick up here in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. Let me read this to you. But know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come. We went over that, so we're not going to talk about that tonight. Tonight, we're going to be focusing on verses 2 through 5. For men will become lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. And the last bullet is having a form of godliness but denying its power. Now, right here in 2 Timothy, he lists 18 individual bullets, if you will, of what delusion looks like, but the English rendering doesn't really give it justice. So we're going to break down into the Greek wording, because that's where it really becomes alive, and that's where you really see the things that are happening. So, are you ready to jump into verse 2?
Yes, sir.
All righty. Verse 2. For men shall be lovers of themselves. That's what we're going to put under the microscope. For men will be lovers of themselves. This right here, that English phrase, comes from the Greek words anthropos, esentine, philautoi. And anthropos is something, you hear the word anthropology. You can hear it in there. So this, you understand, is mankind. And because it uses the word anthropos, it is saying that there's going to be a wide range of people. This isn't going to be a few hundred people. This anthropology, it's worldwide. So it's just saying a large number worldwide are going to be lovers of themselves. But lovers of themselves, what does that mean? Everybody seems like they love themselves, right?
Right.
All right, so in order to understand that, you got to look at unholy. It's really unholy or misplaced love is what the anthropos is pointing to. And those two Greek words are esentai, philaltoi. In order to understand that, esentai is a word that comes from the future middle voice of a Greek word, Amy. And Amy really means in the first century, and this was something that Timothy couldn't wrap his head totally around, it means an I am generation. Like it's all about me. Look at me. Hey, look, don't look over there. Look at me. I'm more important than you. What I say overrides what you say. What I think overrides what you think. So to put a modern spin on that, you could say this is selfie before selfie was invented, before selfie entered the lexicon of people your age, because I certainly hope people my age aren't out there doing selfies. That's a little ridiculous. But
Be surprised.
yeah, I would be surprised. But selfie, that entered into our lexicon. Now you got selfie sticks that people hold out in front of them and walk out in front of cars. You got selfie this. In fact, I've got a few examples I want you to look at, and we'll show the viewers, of people doing outlandish things. I guess you call them doing selfie things. And the first example is this lady right here, standing over this big hole, looking up at her selfie, at her camera, smiling. And that's not Mel's hole she's going to fall into. Everybody's asking about an episode on Mel's hole. But that is a hole, as you can tell, that is a long way down.
Not want to fall down that hole, whatever hole it is.
And you probably wouldn't hear a splash at the end of it. You'll hear a thud.
If you hear anything at all, it's so far down.
It'd be like this. Oh, and you don't hear nothing. So I don't understand that. This next one, I have no idea what this is. But this isn't what you would call Photoshop. These are individuals laying out there over this big cliff while this guy takes a selfie. You know that old saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words? Well, you got 1,000,000 right here.
Not very good.
I can't explain it, but what I can tell you about this photo, it is the #1 cause of selfie deaths in the country of India.
Can I just pause on that factoid? The fact that that's even like a fact means that there are other causes of selfie deaths enough to create the word selfie deaths.
Yeah, so
that part's crazy.
Yeah, and then
general.
That's what I'm saying. People do outlandishly dumb things to take a selfie. Now, this last one is a lady who looks like she's probably not ignorant. She looks pretty, like an average educated lady, standing on a cliff, or not on a cliff, but on a ledge, as you can see, taking a selfie. It looks like a long way down. Once again, people who seem like they're educated, they're not ignorant.
I don't know why you didn't say that about the first lady who had the marijuana hat on. I don't know why you skipped over that detail for her. Come on, give her respect.
Well, I will say Mel's whole lady, the marijuana leaves going around her hat probably had something to do with why I'm standing next to it. I wasn't going to point that out. You did. So that's on you, man.
Yeah.
So,
I'll fall on that.
But anyway, as you can see, people have lost their mind to do a selfie. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, I'm not saying selfies are a sign of the last days, but maybe I am. But that's not what I'm pointing at here when I say the word esentai coming from the middle voice of the Greek word Amy. But what I am saying is that there's a proliferation of people doing crazy things to show themselves it's about me. You wouldn't get out there and risk your life unless it was all about you. Because sure. I think these people have families, and they're not putting their families. And that one lady looks like she probably has. At least she's in the age where you would think she has children, and you're not putting your family. You're not putting anybody in your thought process if you're going to do things. And those guys out there in India laying on the cliff, I know what. And that's not even.
I mean, they're so close together. I feel like if they try to get up, they're gonna
they're all gonna
slip each other. They're gonna throw each other off, trying to grab each other.
When one falls, they all grab each other. It's like an accordion
effect.
effect. So, but isn't what we're looking at now is a domino effect. So maybe that picture is appropriate. I'm not saying selfies are a sign of the end times, but what I am trying to communicate is Paul's warning Timothy that there's going to be this pervasive thought process of people just thinking of themselves, putting themselves first and not even considering their ramifications of their actions. And you see that in these selfies right here. So I think we won't go any further with Essentine, but it is I see a selfie world out there, so we can see that happening. The last one here to explain it, so we can understand this lovers of self, comes from the Greek word philauto. And whenever you see phil, that's talking about love. So whenever you see that in the Greek language, and the oi part means widespread, but we're not going to get into all that. But this philauto is a very peculiar word in the Greek language, because Greek scholars tell us that you can't find this word written anywhere in anything that they found in literature, in reports. This word, philauto, is only mentioned here in this letter that Paul wrote to Timothy. It is a word that you could say the Holy Spirit penned to make a huge teaching point to not just Timothy, but to everyone through the church age, and especially us. We should be looking for this because this is talking about last of the last days. Philauto is a compound word of phileo and auto, or autos. And when you put these words together, phileo and autos, it describes something very peculiar, but these words aren't not to be put together in the normal language. So only place that you can find this, the way we're going to interpret this, phileo, is over in the book of Mark. Let me read it to you, and then we're going to put it with being a person, auto being a human. Mark 14:44, and this is describing the kiss that Judas gives Jesus. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I kiss, the one I phileo, that is the man." So yes, phileo means love in the Greek language, but it also means kiss. Because there's always self-love. People love themselves. That's pretty much Essentine. So this is something when you see the philauto, you know that it's got to be something, there's a nuance there in the language, so you have to go down that definition and look at kiss. So imagine Timothy gets this letter and he reads it and he says, self-kissing. What is self-kissing? I mean, I guess I can kiss my...
That's going to the blooper reel. Just out of context, that moment, it's in there.
I mean, what else could it be?
Yeah, that's weird. Yeah, I'm sure he was just like, are we serious? Are we sure? Is that the right?
I'm sure he's sitting there. I'm sure the Holy Spirit had to do some work on his heart. We have a lot of material at our disposal to help us learn that Timothy didn't have. But philauto means self-kissing. I don't know what that looks like. So in order to put this into perspective for last day issues, philauto is describing people who take narcissism to the next level. This is something, because there is a Greek word, narcississo, which we get narcissism from. And if it was just simply narcissism, or like a really extreme level of narcissism, they would use that word with some nuances on it to say this is extreme narcissism. But the Holy Spirit created a whole new word, philauto, to explain a form of narcissism not yet seen by the human race. But I think you can see some of that coming out today. It means, in a modern text, or you could say it means, I take narcissism to the point when you say philauto, it means if you're suffering, if you're under the spirit of delusion, Logan, and you're under the spirit of philauto, that means you love yourself so much that you elevate yourself to godlike status. That's what it's communicating here. People will elevate themselves in their minds to godlike status. And you see this playing out in people today around the world, the way they speak to people, the way they talk to people, even in crimes, the way people are abusing children in a sexual way, the way people are abusing adults in a sexual way. You said we're not supposed to use names, but can I use the name of a deceased person?
Sure.
Okay. Like people like Jeffrey Epstein. These people right there suffered big time from Phil Altoy, and everybody that flew on that Lolita Express in his airplane down to Love Island, all these people are falling into this category of Phil Altoy. So if you want to kind of wrap your mind around what that looks like in the modern era, you could say that, because when you can hurt people carte blanche, it doesn't matter. That means you're putting yourself in a godlike status. Yeah. It goes far beyond something that you could say is simply narcissism. When you worship yourself, Phil Altoy means there's nothing off the table for you to do. Everything is okay. So another example you could say of Anthropos, Essentai, Phil Altoy, together people will be lovers of themselves, will be when you think that you can change your sex, that means you're godlike, and you really can't do that. You just change your appearance. So really, it's just another delusion. I'm not saying that we don't hate people that do that. We should never criticize, or because my belief system doesn't square with that doesn't mean I have the right to bully them, criticize them, because that's sin itself too.
I think the Christian stance that we should have is compassion, sympathy, but also like Jesus, he doesn't want us to stay where we are. The world wants us to define ourselves a certain way, and the delusion is to convince us, no, you really are that way. Mm-hmm. That really is who you are. And I think that's the delusional part. Not that people are delusional for feeling that way, because people feel like they're not themselves all the time. I've felt that way in a depression way. I felt like, oh, well, I'm not who I used to be. And if I let the world dictate, okay, you are depressed, that is who you are. Now, go down this road. I think there's some form of delusion wrapped up in that, with some good intent, of course, but some of it is delusional to think I'm going to identify with that. And I think the same thing's true with the transgender issue. Same thing's true with things like depression, etc. It's extremely complex, of course, and so is the transgenderism issue. But I think delusion is kind of an easy blanket.
Absolutely.
Way to say it.
When man thinks they can manipulate weather,
yeah,
that's one. When we merge robotics with human DNA, and man becomes machine-like, especially when we're going to interface, according to some studies that I've read, with quantum computing, then you become godlike. That's all Phil Altoy. So you've kind of expressed some ways that you see it, but I think if you stop and you look at what we just explained, what Anthropos, Essentai, Phil Altoy looks like, I think you see a lot of that. It's more than just loving yourself. If you start looking with the critical eye, so to speak, you'll start seeing more and more of that manifesting itself in all corners in every segment of society.
Yeah.
So covered that one. So that's the first.
Can I give a really dumb throwaway funny example of that? Have you heard of a self-wedding?
Marrying yourself?
Have you heard of that officially? That is a real thing that people are doing now.
I have over in Asia. I've read one over in Japan where a guy was marrying himself.
Really?
Yeah, and I just kind of like whatever.
When was that?
It was. I read it within the last 24 months, last 2 years.
Okay, I think the first example was like late 80s of that happening, like on the books, and now it's just like a trend where people are literally setting up a ceremony, inviting their friends and family, and they're marrying themselves.
Okay, how do they get a divorce later?
I don't know. That's tough. That's tricky. They got to that's a whole.
That's just okay. So you can say if you read that article where this started in the 80s, then there is a trend to Phil Altoy all the way back then, starting, as I said, it's going to build up. It's going to build up according to verses 15 and 17 and what we're studying to a crescendo. And I think you're going to see more and more of that out there. The self-love situation. So ready to go to number 2 on our list?
Yes.
Lovers of money. Here's another love. It's the second one we have in a row. And I think the reason why I want to say this about this list: there is no one on this list that's like worse than the other. It's not like 1 through 10, one being the worst, and the last one we cover would be the least of these, so to speak, like a top 25 in basketball or football. It's not like that. It's just a list of bullets of what delusion looks like. But right here, it's unique because the first 2 bullets that we see are directly connected to each other. So this one here, lovers of money, especially the way it's written in the language in the original Greek, the nuances. This is talking about, we talked about misplaced love, and misplaced love will produce misplaced priorities. Yeah. And so philalguroi is the word that we get lovers of money from. Philalguroi is this word here, philalguroi. And philalguroi is connected directly to it, because when you self-kiss yourself, you're going to have all sorts of, that's already misplaced love, so you're going to have all types of misplaced priorities. And the misplaced priorities, since it's so connected to the first one we have, this is money, this is love. We've all seen and heard and read articles about basketball players, musicians, actors who once upon a time had hundreds of millions of dollars, and then after partying, drugs, alcohol, whatever, they've got nothing left. They misplaced our priorities, and they blew through large sums of money. And that's what it's really pointing to, is crazy spending becomes the norm in the last of the last days. Crazy types of spending, So you see that playing out already with these men and women of fame who have access to money. But the trickle-down effect of that is people who don't have that kind of means. They don't have a job where they're making millions of dollars they can waste. They still spend their money outlandishly. It's just proportioned different to their means. Yeah. And then they wind up losing everything like these famous people. So you need to look at that, and you see that on the rise. And you probably have friends that you see spending money in crazy ways. You're like, what are they thinking? What are their priorities? But then when you have trillions of dollars of debt from the national government, from our federal government, it's easy for you to start rationalizing it. Well, if they're in $1 trillion in debt, then I can go in debt and I can have 50 credit cards and all that. But then, they say the little chickens come home to roost. And when they come home to roost, people aren't prepared for that. And we see this right now taking place. It's an epidemic in people's, in the finance. If you read anything from Wall Street, what can be trusted, that there is a financial bubble about to pop. And a lot of it's because of philalguroi. People just not having proper priorities on their spending. When you see people letting their children sit in a car half starving while they run in to buy heroin, or they run in to buy some kind of drug or do whatever, that's philalguroi manifesting itself. And you say, well, that's always been going on. Yeah, it has been. I come from law enforcement. I know this. But it is out of control nowadays.
Yeah.
Any questions on that?
No, I could maybe even add something. I'm kind of curious in your thoughts. What do you think about the love of money manifesting in the way that we spend it, but also in the ways that we're willing to make it? I think the world overall has seen just a tragedy as far as our moral compass when it comes to making money. I think people are stooping to new lows with scams and pornographic, content, stuff like that. It's just all over the place now.
All of that falls underneath the blanket of philalguroi. That is all part of the delusion. You see it all the time. So and so teacher gets fired for having an
affair or something.
A private porn channel people can go watch, and so they get fired for that. And they're like, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't make money as a teacher." And I do believe that education on the level of high school, elementary, they're woefully underpaid. But then again, you can't go do that either.
Yeah,
you see what I mean?
That doesn't justify it, and that's the problem. Yeah, the love of money will make you, and the love of self will make you justify things.
Philalguroi. Those are all examples. If you'll just stop and think about what we're saying about philalguroi and philalguroi, and you start looking at that, you're going to start, that right there and that right there. You'll see it everywhere. And that's because we're living in the last of the last days. Anything else on that one?
Nope.
All right, so we'll go to the third on our bullet, and it is boasters. Now, just braggers, that sort of thing. Before we jump into the Greek on that, do you like hanging around with people that all they can do is just brag on, or they either brag on what they can do or what they've done, or when you say, hey, look, I'm doing this in your private business, and then you got 3 or 4 people come up and they start bragging about how they've done it and they've done it better.
The one-upper.
It's one up on steroids. And you see that in churches, you see that in jobs all around. Every job I've ever had, we always had the guy we called the one-upper, because it didn't matter. He's been around the world twice and seen everything but wind. You know what I mean? And probably he's seen wind. If I said I saw wind on me too. You know, this, and that's just kind of human nature with some people. But in the last of the last days, this boaster is gonna really jump out. But believe it or not, this English word boaster here on our list, even though we don't like boasters and hanging around them, and that's probably a sign of the end times with people, that's not what this is communicating. And that's why you got to understand the Greek when you look through these, because pretty much every one that we look at, it's the best that the translators in the 1600s could come up with. It's hard to bring Greek words over from, because the Bible's written in first century Greek, which was cut off. It's not even the Greek language is spoken now, so it's hard to make English words match up with them. So it's not that the Bible's wrong, it's just it's the best English word that matches up, but it doesn't give it justice. So really right here, when we look at boasters in the English language, it's coming from a Greek word called, now help me, I'm going to do my best to say it. This is the one I for some reason I have a hard time saying outright. So it's I think in calzone. That's why I have a hard time with it, because I like calzones, obviously. Alazones. It's alazones. Alazones, where we get boasters from, it means to brag. It means to boast. It's braggadocious in the first century. But that's really not what the bullet you should look at when you're looking at definitions and when you're looking at how it applies to the first century. This word alazones is telling us people twist the truth. But it's not like a fish story, or when I go golfing and talk about some of the things, my escapades on the golf course. That's pretty much alazones. That's what that is. I stretch the truth sometimes, right? I'm not telling lies. I'm stretching the truth. But this is even saying it's worse than that. In the last of the last days, it means truth is going to be on what you could say is a sliding scale. In other words, your truth is your truth. My truth is my truth. There is no absolute truth. Everybody's truth. So I don't know how that's going to work. We see that now. You can see evidence of that now with people having their own truth. Well, what's your truth? Well, it doesn't matter what your truth is if it's not true. But people say, that's my truth. And that's your truth. And we see this spirit of boasters coming out more and more here in the last of the last days. This word here basically says it's going to, when you look at it and how we apply it now as we're looking at the last of the last days, it is saying the absolute truth will be gone in science. It will be gone in criminal justice. It will be gone in the education system. It will be gone within people's community values, because everybody's truth is truth. And there are such things as absolute truth. Gravity is you can't recreate it, but people can say, no, that's not what gravity is. It can do this and that. Okay, that's your truth. That's fine. No, it's not. But you see that now. People get passed along in school because that's their truth. Let them write on the paper whatever they want to write. It's okay. Well, know that that's not, 2 + 2 is 4. No, but they said 6. It's okay. You see what I mean? And you see this now all over the place where there's no truth anymore. And that leads to all types of chaos in every segment of society. And you see it now. When you can smash windows and run in and grab a bunch of Rolexes, no, it's okay. It's okay. They can do that. It's just merchandise. Well, it's a lot of things are wrong there. You're breaking in, you're stealing. Those are all wrong, but it's not absolute truths anymore, man. It's okay. So another thing you can say here, things aren't applied equally across the board anymore. You can get that from this word, but you really get it in a word about 4 or 5, well, about 7 down that we're going to get into, where the criminal justice system is turned upside down. So any comments on boasters, azones,
Nope.
flones, whatever. So as we see, boasters carries the idea of absolving absolute truth, where absolute truth is the truths that we're used to: red light, go; yellow light, slow down, or in the South, it's speed up, and then red light, stop. Those are kind of like absolute truths. You start seeing where green light means stop, and I'm just just giving you an analogy here, but that's what you see happening now. There is no absolute truth anymore, and there is a push out there now in the world to diminish the power of truth, and that's what the spirit of delusion looks like in the last of the last days. You got to understand this as we unpack these bullets. This is all by design. The spirit of delusion is by design to melt the very fabric of society that we're used to. Law and order, being a productive member of society, giving back, benevolence. This spirit of delusion that Jesus is talking about is designed to melt that away, so when the Antichrist takes over, he can build back better.
I like that. I like the use of that. Yep, perfect. I didn't realize. It took me a second. I'm like, is he really saying that? Wow. Okay. All right, we're going with it.
All right. And I'm not saying people that use the term build back better are Antichrist.
Get that elephant out of the room real quick. Just get it out.
Maybe I am. But we can have fun. But I did that on purpose, just to say that it is a process of melting down to build back something different. And it has to take time to do. And so we are living in the age where this melting down is taking place. What is left of that meltdown will be put back into a new mold and built back in a way that the Antichrist can use. And that's when you see Nephilim will be coming in to play in the last of the last days during the spirit of delusion. And in the spirit of delusion, as it's manifesting itself and becoming so strong, it's just easier to accept these hybrids. That's part of it, since we're still talking about the days of Noah and what that looks like. So next episode, we'll jump back in on these words.
I'm excited for next episode. Yeah.
You got to leave the build back better in.
Yeah.
You got to leave that, because
I can't. Yeah, I can't take that out. I can't take that out. That was so unexpected. I didn't know how to react. I was like, oh. Oh, gosh.